Seamus is rocking out. Bill Meal Buttercup. It's all fun and games until YouTube hears me play more than 5 seconds of that. It starts throttling my videos worse than it normally does. Good stuff. But welcome to the Scary Alvarez podcast. We have a great guest today, Seamus Rohrer. He's in a lot of stuff: Badger on SI, Badger Notes, RotoWire, Talking Badgers. You know the name. You know the sweet hair. You've seen it around. As you can see in my photo, it's been a while since I was rocking that kind of do, but we'll make do with it and go forward. Welcome aboard.
Scary, thanks for having me, man. It's an absolute pleasure. Can't wait to talk some ball.
Good stuff. So we're going to talk Wisconsin basketball portal stuff and a little bit also about the 2026 recruiting class and maybe a couple of keeps and losses in the portal itself. But first of all, I want to start, Seamus, with the gentleman that Wisconsin, Gard, and his crew have added in the transfer portal. And just for our purposes today, I understand he's a 2026 recruit, but I'm gonna consider Owen Foxwell as a part of the portal class just because he's 22 years old. He's in a very different class than these other kids like Fenderson and Ball in terms of the things he's been doing, the experience he has, and that sort of thing. So let's start with Eian Elmer. This is I guess people have called it the crown jewel of the portal class. Miami, small forward, 6'6" or 6'7", depending on which site you're looking at. Talk to us about what Elmer's going to bring to the Badgers.
Well, I think Elmer's really the only guy who they've pulled out of the portal so far. And of course, they got one more spot open, but he's the only guy they've pulled out of the portal so far who I think is an instant plug and play starter. I think you look at the roster right now, there's obviously a great argument for a guy like Trey Autry to start at that 2 spot. But Eian Elmer, there is just some serious upside here. And, you talk about a team like Miami of Ohio, and obviously they were a huge national story. But Eian Elmer, he wasn't used a whole lot by the Red Hawks, just 18.3 usage percentage. He wasn't a go-to player for them by any stretch of the imagination. But man, he can absolutely shoot the lights out. And he's an elite defender, particularly really good at creating turnovers without fouling. And I think that kind of just speaks to some of his experience. But, you love the size, 6'6", 6'7", like you said, depending on who you talk to. But I think he just slides in perfectly at that 3 spot. And the fact that he shot at least 40% from distance in all 3 of his seasons, and he's taking mostly 3-pointers, about like 61% of his shots are coming from distance. So, he is a seriously high upside player. And again, I think the only guy who walks in the door and is immediately a starter.
Yeah, you hit on some of the most notable things about Elmer. One thing that struck me when he made his statement about coming to Wisconsin is, and some of it's a little bit between the lines, but some of it is what he said, they're going to use him more than Miami did, if that makes sense. He didn't say, I'm going to be a slasher now, in so many words, but the impression I was left with after hearing what he said is that he is going to be going to the basket significantly more than what he did with the Red Hawks, who had, as you know, Seamus, one of the deepest rotations in all of college basketball. I think they had 6 guys in double figures, which is just almost unheard of.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not that they have an okay guy who's going to become a superstar and give it a little more opportunity, but I do see a scenario where Elmer comes in, has his best scoring average by a wide margin, and also expands his game. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you hit on it. I'm just really excited to see what he does in this expanded opportunity, because like we've been saying, he wasn't used a whole lot, and he doesn't have particularly, you look at his numbers getting downhill, just some of the advanced statistics there. He's not drawing that many fouls per game, per 40 minutes, whatever. I think it's 3.0 personal fouls he would draw over a 40-minute stretch. That's not crazy, but again, just haven't been getting that opportunity. So I just feel like I can't wait to see what he looks like when the Badgers unleash him and when he can get downhill from that wing, because it doesn't, Google his highlights and immediately the athleticism just pops off the tape. So he clearly has that ability. And I think that's what makes him really exciting.
It's amazing being in a situation now with the way the Badgers run their offense that a player coming to Wisconsin is going to show more athletic upside than it used to be kind of the not the opposite, but it was just such a different system 3 or 4 years ago. And now seeing the ability for an offensive side of the person's game to be maximized in a new system is very cool. By the way, Seamus, I did a little bit of a dive on his free throw shooting because, of course, John. We remember John Tonji. This guy's not John Tonji. I don't want to make any comparisons, but right. John Tonji lived at the free throw line, not just because he shot 90%, but because he got there so often. It was very encouraging to see Elmer between his sophomore and junior season. He doubled his free throw attempts, and it wasn't a ton. I think it was 99 attempts, but his free throw percentage also went up 7% in this past year. So there is room for growth there. I'm super excited about this guy.
100%. Yeah, and like you said, you only see him growing. I mean, he's not regressing in any way. Like he's just steadily improved. And yeah, I mean, again, just that 43.2%, whatever it is he shot from distance last year is just super enticing. So yeah, super, super excited about this kid.
The sort of reflexive pushback is, he was playing in the MAC and now he's got to go to the Big Ten with real things. Watch him in the tournament and he basically showed that he belonged not only on that court in the NCAA tournament, but he should do just fine against better teams like he'll see in the Big Ten. I'm just not so much is made of that stepping up a level thing. And with this guy, as consistent as he has been and all he has shown in 3 years, I'm not concerned with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some real athleticism in the MAC. I mean, you watch some of those games. I mean, there are some good players, and that's not like that's a really tiny mid-major league he's coming from. I mean, a lot of these guys, there's a decent amount of projection involved, but I think a league like the MAC, I mean, even a league like the A10, Trey Autry out of George Washington, like those are good mid-major leagues, and I'm not too concerned really about their games translating. And I know that that's something that the Wisconsin staff also spends a lot of time evaluating as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into where they've gone, what directions they've had to go for various reasons, whether it's NIL or whatever. But I never get the feeling that Greg Gard, when he is working the portal, is desperate. I think he had some frustrations about his resources this year. We can get into that after we talk about the players. But this guy had a spreadsheet. He was not pulling names out of the hat. So when you get a name like Trey Autry, I guarantee you that Greg Gard had this guy on a radar, and wherever he was in that Rolodex, he popped up. Tell me about your thoughts on Trey Autry.
Yeah, Trey Autry, he's a guy that, he first signs. I'm looking at his stats. I'm like, 12.3 points per game or whatever it was. He can shoot like 40% from deep. Like, this guy might start right away. On second thought, I'm sure he can. I'm sure that the staff would love him to develop into an every game starter. There's a few things that I just haven't seen him do. He's a very, very average rebounder. He's not really creating too much havoc defensively. He hardly gets to the free throw line at all. Phenomenal shooter, both from, inside the arc and outside. Really good true shooting percentage. But so again, very specialized approach I think the Badgers took in the portal here. And they clearly saw a really good shooter in Autry and went and got him. Again, interested to see how he develops some of the other aspects of his game, which are non-negotiables for Gard and his staff, like defense and rebounding and things like that. But again, a lot of promise with this guy, super experienced kid, 100 games, 68 starts. So a lot to like here. Definitely want to see how the rest of his game kind of rounds out in Madison.
Yeah, we'll see. And again, this isn't a perfect comparison, but he might be more Braden Carrington than John Blackwell. I think that's a fair way of looking at the usage they may anticipate with him.
Yeah, I've heard the Braden Carrington comparison for sure, and lights out 3-point shooter. So that totally makes sense to me. I think what's going to be super interesting, and I'm sure we might get into this later, but I think what's going to be super interesting is who can push him for that spot, because I think he may walk into Madison potentially as the, just start in that 2 role. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see if guys like Zach Kissinger and Hayden Jones even potentially could push him for that 2 spot and see what kind of development they take this offseason.
Yeah, I think that there has to be competition. As simple as that. Well, so, I mean, my follow-up question was going to be, obviously we can't predict what's going to happen in October, but if you had to kind of put your Greg Gard hat on and project and presume we're not going to add another starting caliber 2 in the portal, What's your prediction for who will be there starting?
I think, I do think that it would probably be Autry starting out the year just with his experience. Um, and again, some of the he's not going to give you a whole lot on the glass. He's not going to really slash that much, but he that experience does lend itself to some good things. Like he's really good at not turning the ball over. For instance, 85th percentile in turnover percentage. So really solid in that category. And again, kind of just that experience that we were talking about with Elmer. I think that's going to give him a leg up, sort of give him the inside track to that two role. But like you said, there's obviously going to be competition. But I do think that Autry probably starts out in that two role.
Makes sense. And I'm not a big numbers analytical guy. I'm not Billy Bean by any stretch, but I did look a little bit into the Trey Autry defensive numbers because that was one of the things when you brought up less than sterling defensive numbers. And from what I have gathered, on ball defense, he's actually pretty solid, but besides that, falls off the cliff. So it looks like there's something to work with there. I mean, that's better than on ball defense being relatively terrible, which John Blackwell was last year. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that part?
Well, I definitely I wrote about how on-ball defense is one of a top skill that the Badgers need to acquire, and I definitely I would agree with you there. I think that again, I was kind of talking about his sort of his havoc numbers, right? Like his steals, his blocks,
Yeah.
those aren't really there. So he's not creating a whole lot off the ball, but on the ball, yeah, he's a solid defender. He's 6'4", like he's got the size and he's got the experience. So I'm not too concerned in that category. And you don't really have a choice but to play defense in this, on Greg Gard's team, or else you're just not going to play. So I think he's going to be fine in that category. I'm not sure that he's a defensive spark plug, but I'd be really more worried about sort of how else he's going to contribute other than just 3-point shooting.
Makes sense. If this were college fantasy basketball, he might not be a high pick because he doesn't have enough categories.
Yeah, and that's okay. And again, this is a really, I think this is one of Greg Gard's most just targeted approaches in the portal, right? Because obviously, a lot of upside there in a lot of different areas. But you go get a guy like Autry, who just lights out shooter, and I imagine Gard has a very particular role and vision for him.
Speaking of particular role, Victory Oneno from Hofstra. Um, I don't think it's any secret to anyone who cares enough to be listening to us right now. By the way, throw me a like and a subscription, and also Seamus' stuff. We always appreciate that. Um, that this is a very, at least in recent years, atypical Badger big. I mean, that's fair to say. He's not going to shoot very much, I think, outside of the lane. His shooting percentage isn't spectacular, and he's being brought in more for athleticism and rim protection. Uh, get me inside, if you can, get me inside Gard's head here with this pick.
Yeah, again, just I think super specialized approach here. And I think, I'm really interested to see how Gard wants to use him, right? Like, does he want to start him in some games so that there's that added defensive presence on the floor? I mean, when you pop on the tape and you watch some of his highlights, he can fly around. Like he's a big center, but he can fly. He's got quick feet. Obviously like super long and lanky, huge wingspan. So this is definitely a very specialized defensive addition. And a rebounding. I mean, he's tremendous at rebounding. He's 99th percentile in offensive rebounding, 98th percentile, I believe, in defensive rebounding. And again, didn't play a whole lot for Hofstra, right? Like wasn't used all that much. And Hofstra was using him in a specialized role too. But so, very, very specific niche that I think he's going to fill here. But I really like the pickup because again, I just think it's very focused, and I think there's a very specific plan being enacted here.
Love it. And we're going to talk about one more guy, but before we do that, there's another uh, person that the Badgers got in the portal, but it really wasn't in the portal. It was just simply a retention, which was as big as anything they did, and that's retaining Nolan Winter. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say a few words about how much that meant to the Badgers. I know in our heart of hearts, most of us believed he was a take for the Badgers all along in the cycle. It was just a question of working it out. But I'll be honest, I mean, as it was getting towards the portal deadline and things like that, just you let these little things creep into the back of your mind. You don't know anything for sure, but it was really awesome to hear him coming back to Madison. How big is retaining Nolan Winter?
It's huge, man. And obvious, and like you were saying, you're kind of getting to the back end of the transfer portal window. April 18th, 19th, 20th, you're like, man, is he going to put his name in? Is he going to put his name in? Like you said, the consensus was that he wasn't. Um, and Badgers on his eye had reported that he was going to return a little bit before the portal window closed a few days ago. But yeah, I mean, just so significant. And forgive me because someone made a great take on Twitter and I just forget who it was, but it was essentially that, retaining Nolan Winter is equivalent to landing a top 20 transfer, excuse me. And I couldn't, put it better myself. Like, there's not going to be a whole lot of buzz about retentions, right? It's just not nearly as exciting as landing a new player from the transfer portal. But this is absolutely huge. And I mean, you were certainly biting your nails with Winter a little bit because, and again, like you said, I think in everyone's heart of hearts, they were expecting a return to Madison. But can you imagine if Winter entered the portal on one of the last days? I mean, a big man like himself, experienced, skilled, especially a big man who can stretch the floor, that's already a hot commodity in the transfer portal. And then if you enter in the last couple of days, I mean, you're setting yourself up for a bag. So yeah, I definitely, a little dicey down the stretch there, but I think that's probably the biggest move they'll make all offseason, quite honestly, addition, retention, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And again, it's not necessary for me to take a position on this, but I do want to do it to give some perspective. I did consider losing John Blackwell a big loss. I think anyone who says that's not a loss is fooling themselves, however bitter they might be about him going to Duke. But I said this long before Blackwell committed anywhere, that I would much rather lose John Blackwell than Nolan Winter. And that wasn't hope. That was serious because Nolan Winter is harder to find in the portal than John Blackwell is. Duke arguably has 4 John Blackwells on their team right now. How many Nolan Winters have they got? So I was super happy to hear him coming back.
100%. And I think also just the consistency. I mean, he was a walking double-double this year. He has that, I believe it was after maybe the Villanova loss where he's crying up at the podium. He's got the Badger pride. Like, Nolan Winter is everything you want in a Wisconsin Badger. And, I bet the staff, quite honestly, knew how difficult it was going to be to retain John Blackwell this offseason. So I think they were in on Winter from the start. And I again, cannot be understated how huge of a retention that is, especially just with the way this roster is constructed.
Yeah, and despite the fact that we were bringing some scoring heft in Elmer, and there's certainly reasonable, thoughts. We're going to talk about Owen Foxwell in a moment to think there's going to be scoring coming from other places. A significant jump in usage and scoring from Nolan Winter next season would not be surprising to me. In all fact, I'd be surprised if it didn't happen. I think he's a 16, 17 point a game guy and probably flirts with a double-double average. That's my guess.
100%. 100% agree.
Love it. Okay, now here's the one I alluded to in a moment. We're still talking with the transfer guy. I know he is a class of 26, but he's a 22-year-old grown man out of Australia. Owen Foxwell, point guard, rising point guard for the Badgers. He's been handed the keys. He's a little bit divisive, not divisive in the sense that there are Badger fans who don't like him. I think everyone can appreciate this, but you remember probably when he first committed, people were saying immediately, "Oh, we're going to bring his brother in too, who's out in Portland." No, that was never the plan. This guy is arguably every bit or more developed in his game right now than the other Foxwell, and I am probably on the Foxwell continuum in the 80 to 90th percentile as far as how excited I am about his potential. Where do you put yourself on that continuum?
Well, you know what's scary? I'll take some of the blame for pushing that Joel Foxwell narrative, because I certainly viewed that as a possibility for a second. But no, I do really love the Owen Foxwell pickup, and I think that I just love his play style. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, East Coast point guards. That's a huge thing. I know he's obviously from Australia, but he's got some of that game that reminds me of like a really old school sort of pass first point guard. You really love his handles. He's had seasons where he's averaged, 5 assists a game in Australia's NBL, and good enough shooter from distance. And I really like how crafty he is around the rim and in the paint. I think that's something that that was a huge boost for Wisconsin, obviously, with what Nick Boyd could do, just in terms of dribble penetration and hitting some really tough runners, floaters, things of that nature. Owen Foxwell's got a little bit of that same craftiness to him, sort of just in that intangible aspect. So I'm really excited for this. I think he's the unquestioned starting point guard, obviously, at this point, and there's definitely a lot to like there.
Yeah, and by the way, I wasn't trying to call anyone out who thought about his brother. That wasn't my vibe. I just, now looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it was pretty clear that Gard was not, doing this to, it wasn't like a Rucci thing or like a, bringing in one guy for the other. It's standing its own. And I'd be very curious to see how his defensive game stands up in the Big Ten. I have to believe playing so much in pro ball in one of the, it's not one of the elite leagues in the world, but it's a solid, well-regarded league down there.
Yeah,
he's playing grown men, defending grown men. That is a very, very good precursor to playing defense in the Big Ten, as far as I'm concerned. So I think his defensive contributions will probably exceed Nick Boyd's. Offense, probably not, but they're just different players, as you said. I mean, this is a little bit like an Aaron Kraft kind of guy. Maybe with a little better shot. So if that name rings a bell, he played like 19 years for Ohio State back around 2010. He's in the league every year.
Yeah.
Very well, good. Well, so that takes a pretty good look at the transfer guys or the guys around, I consider transfer guys. Let's really quickly, I know there are going to be deep dive shows for this, but I want to get into the class of 26 freshmen that are coming in. I have added a couple of dudes in the last couple of days. Manchester, I got Isaac Riddle, Jackson Ball, another kid from New Zealand, and Latravian Fenderson, a Wisconsin kid. Those four names, we're not going to get into all of them on this show. We can maybe do another one where we hit on that. But do you see a name on that list who could see meaningful minutes this upcoming fall and winter for the Badgers?
Yeah, I've been kind of struggling with that recently, because I really do like Wisconsin's approach overall, sort of this offseason, right? I think, you're adding some international players that can contribute pretty quickly. You're also adding international players that may be more developmental in Riddle. But you're adding some freshmen that, again, you're sort of just building the foundation of your program. And then you're adding some instant impact transfers. There's eggs in many different baskets. So overall, I really do like the approach. In terms of who can contribute from that freshman class, I look at a guy like Jackson Ball just because of his overseas experience. And then I maybe look at a guy like Fenderson just because of, sort of that position he plays. I envision him a little more on that wing. And behind Elmer, Wisconsin is a little thin there, depending on sort of where you view a guy like Hayden Jones. So I think you're going to want to look at the experience there. Obviously, Foxwell would be the most experienced if we're considering him part of that 2026 class. But I think, looking at those incoming players in that class, it's just about that experience. So that's why I would highlight a guy like Ball there. Potentially back up 2 guard role, 3 guard role, maybe. I'm not sure if he's quite big enough for that. He can pass a little bit, but we'll have to see. It's going to be a lot of new faces, honestly. So a lot to learn about this team for sure. But Ball's the guy I would highlight right away.
That sounds good. I feel like Ball could see it. I'm looking at the class, and again, you never know what kind of camp these guys are going to have. So they might come in August, and Fenderson is just exploding. And he's – I'm not comparing him to Jonathan Taylor, but there was that – if you remember a while ago, there was that fall camp where you really hadn't heard of Jonathan Taylor, but you heard about him every day in camp. And it became pretty clear, I think they had him kind of almost jokingly the 4th string running back after the first 3 weeks of camp in August, and everyone knew he was going to be starting.
Yeah.
So you could have someone like that. And again, that was I think it was a composite 3-star at the time. And no, I'm not saying Latravian Fenderson is Jonathan Taylor. That's not fair to Mr. Fenderson. But it just underscores the situation that until you get the guys in there, you'll never know. I just feel like Gender Freetag, for example, I was one of those who was, drinking the Kool-Aid sounds mean because this guy has righted himself and is going to have a great college career.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh yeah, he's going to get plenty of time at point. He's going to be starting for Wisconsin. And then it became pretty clear a couple weeks into that fall camp that the guy was going to be lucky to get any time. And so you just never know with freshmen. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of these names, I'd say it's almost likely Ball or Fenderson, makes some noise and jumps further than we know. But the good news is, I think there are enough bodies in that camp now who can do stuff, who basically make me feel pretty good about the fact that no one has to contribute as a freshman. That's a good feeling.
Right. I do think they're at that point, and I am really interested to see what they do with that final roster spot. I would love to see them add another impactful transfer. But yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, you'd love to see maybe just one freshman, nothing crazy, maybe 10, 15 minutes a game, but good minutes. And I don't know, then that rotation would be pretty deep. But you're right. I do think they're in a good spot where that doesn't need to be super high on the list of concerns out of that 2026 class to contribute immediately.
Well, you said the magic, and I appreciate all that. You said the magic word. I'm not sure if you meant to, but we still may be looking for another portal ad. And I understand there's been some bigger names, for example, decommit or entering the portal from Alabama,
Yep.
some other places. Without putting you too much on the spot to say exactly who it's going to be, do you have a name or two, or at least a type of athlete or two that you could see a reasonable scenario where Gard adds one more?
Of course. Yeah. I think the guy I'm looking at is Devion Hanna, who you mentioned, the Wisconsin native and Alabama transfer. Something about him that really stands out is his defense. I mean, he's lauded for his defense. When he got to Alabama, the Crimson Tide head coach Nate Oates, he really just, I mean, even before the season started and before he suffered a season-ending injury, obviously, but just praised him, heaped praise on him for his defense. And so I think that's obviously a really attractive trait and something that Wisconsin knows it needs to get better at. And obviously, he fits that sort of 3-and-D mold, and potentially another sort of player on the wing. I think they're probably pretty solid at forward right now. Could always add another body there, especially if they see a very, particular skill set that they like. But I would say definitely another backcourt player, just some scoring punch, maybe some experience. But I say experience, but if Hannah wants to come to Madison, I think you let him walk right through that door.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I don't know how likely that is because it's just, again, do you believe the message board stuff or don't you? It sounds like he's not looking for he's not looking for like a John Blackwell bag, but I think, hey, come on in, we'll give you some Culver's coupons. I don't think that's going to work. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I think that certainly solves your issue with who might start the two. I mean, I just think there's a lot of would you see him at a different position? I mean, would he be a 2 or a 3? I mean, how do you think he's going to slide in if they got him?
If they got him, I mean, again, you'd sort of just have to look at the rest of the roster, like who might they get with that last addition. I think he'd probably be a 2.
Yeah.
Is he 6'6"? I don't have his height off the very top of my head, but I think he's a pretty taller guard. I don't want to butcher it, but I'm not sure that he's got the requisite size for that 3 spot. We'll see. I think probably 2 is where they'd want him. But again, all very hypothetical.
Yeah, he's 6'6", so he's similar size to Elmer, but and he's got pretty good ups. I just think that we're a little bit devoid in slashers.
100%.
You can make it work with this offense. You don't need a bunch of slashers, but that's why I'm saying that I think Elmer has been told he's going to become a little more of a slasher than he's been at Miami, which isn't saying a ton because he didn't do a lot of that at Miami.
Right.
But anyway, it's just interesting to think about. But awesome, man. Well, hey, I'm going to let you get cruising. I really appreciate your time breaking down this transfer class, breaking down this 26 class. And I would love to talk some football with you in these coming weeks.
Of course, Gary. Let's do it, man. Really appreciate you having me on. It was a blast.
All right. On Wisconsin.